doesn't take too much reading in the media to recognize the issue of the problems caused by fundamentalism across all our religious traditions is a very frightening situation to the world. And so we need to welcome discussions to talk about it. There's always arguments, is it the nature of religion to be driven to the extremes when it feels the things they've held dear, including their traditions, it becomes a reactionary force or not. And so there's many different ways to look at the roots of fundamentalism. So we'd welcome the participation in this discussion. We're going to hear some of your points of view. So on behalf of the church, I'd welcome you here and welcome to hear your comments.
I want to thank James Broussard for actually coming up with the idea of having this discussion. It's one that I would not have thought of on my own. I want to thank him also for the space to have this particular function. I am definitely very proud of the presenters we have this evening. We have people that are scholars, and we have religious leaders that are representative of the three world's largest religious influences, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so thanks everyone for braving the elements to be here this afternoon. Our topic of discussion is religion, fundamentalism, and the crisis, and the perceived crisis of modernity. In preparing for this discussion, we, as an association, had a little bit of pre-discussion to try to find common terms in which to have this particular discussion. One of the challenges were basically trying to define what fundamentalism was in a historical context. And what we've discovered is that we all had different historical contexts. So we reached for the great scholar in Karen Armstrong, who had written a book on the subject. And in her book, she offers a definition of fundamentalism. She says fundamentalists all have a similar pattern. They all follow a certain pattern. And she says that they are embattled forms of spirituality which have emerged as a response to perceived crisis, modernity. I agree with Karen Armstrong when she writes, all three monotheistic faiths have a common fear and anxiety and seems to have a particular difficulty in the response to life in the modern secular world. This is her words. Fundamentalists feel that they are battling against forces that threaten their most sacred values. She goes on to say that those of us, herself included, who relish in freedom and the achievement of modernity find it hard to comprehend the distresses these cause religious fundamentalists. Yet modernization, she continues, yet modernization is often experienced not as liberation, but as aggressive assault. I am aware that these are simplistic definitions, and I'm aware that we will not or not necessarily stay to the lock of these definitions, so the speakers are free to offer their positions as they see fit. But this definition is only to give this discussion a base in which to begin the discussion. And at the end of the day, I hope that we'll find ourselves in common places and common ground rather than differences. This is my presentation to open the discussion, and here we'll have someone who is very capable and very talented, who will be your moderator this evening, Reverend Cynthia Snavely.
We will begin with our Protestant presenter, and she will be introduced by Craig Wilson, who is a young 16-year-old member of the St. James Episcopal Church, her congregation, and he considers himself a Buddhist.
It is an honor to be present at this congregation of different faiths. I have known Caroline Fearless for over 2 years, and it is my privilege to have her as a guide and mentor. Recently, I converted to Buddhism after being a Christian my entire life. Caroline supported me in this journey. We can converse about anything, our beliefs, similarities, and differences. I'm sure you will enjoy her conversation with you. Please open your ears, eyes, and mind for the Reverend Caroline Fearless.
Titles are hard things for me to write to, because I never know what I want to write or title something until after I already know what I've written. So the title, Religion, Fundamentalism, and the Perceived Crisis of Modernity, was hard for me. It's a title that certainly has more than enough words in it, and if I can assume your indulgence for a moment, the only word I would perhaps omit is the word perceived, which is attached to the word crisis. For my nickel, it's not a perceived crisis at all, it's a crisis, period. Not perceived, but real. Now, I also turn to my mentor, Karen Armstrong, for the beginnings of a definition of fundamentalism. Because the word, or perhaps more accurately, the state of being, which she calls it, in fact, means different things to different people. And although I have no expectation that we will leave here all as one, I do cherish the hope that we can make some progress. Now, I suspect that there's not one of us here from any of our varied faith traditions who's not cognizant of the rise of a fundamentalist arm of each of our practices. Armstrong names it correctly, I think. She calls it a militant piety. Operative word, militant. Now, these are her words. Fundamentalists have no time for democracy, pluralism, religious toleration, peacekeeping, free speech, or the separation of church and state. And now, here, she gets very specific and preaches or writes as a Christian. Christian fundamentalists reject the discoveries of biology and physics about the origins of life and insist that the book of Genesis is scientifically sound in its every detail. Now, fundamentalism won't look the same as it grows in the Christian faith as it will in Judaism or Islam. For Christians, the food and drink of fundamentalists is doctrine. And I don't know that that's so true of the other great faiths. But I am less concerned today about what fundamentalism looks like as it reaches its tentacles into our various traditions, as I am concerned with the damage that it does. Political damage. Damage to interfaith collaboration. But most of all, damage to the soul.
I will be introducing our second presenter, who is from the Jewish tradition. He is Rabbi Steve Weitzman, who I don't believe I probably have to introduce at all, because I expect that many of you in the room already know him. He has been the rabbi at Temple Solel since the year 2000. He is the chair of the Bowie Clergy Association, and he feels he has some understanding of Jewish fundamentalism because he has a brother who lived for some time in the Crown Heights area.
As the rabbi, one of the two rabbis of the Bowie community, I need to represent the Jewish voice in this discussion as the Jewish speaker. I need to take a more general role as the chair of the Bowie Clergy Association to discuss the idea of fundamentalism and its role in modernity and religion in the more general, and to protect against overstatement and misapplication, because I think much of what makes this our topic for today falls into those two categories. But I also need to have a heightened degree of responsibility as an individual and as a human being, as a resident and as a leader of this community, as part of this discussion. Because our discussion today has tremendous value and it has great risk. Part of what makes fundamentalism such an important topic for discussion, as I've noted, is how it is applied, how it is misapplied. You will not hear me speak negatively toward the phenomenon of fundamentalism, nor will you hear me look at it as somebody else's issue. My original thought when we were putting this together was how nice, the problem is on somebody else's hand for once. And then I actually opened my mind and started thinking and realized how silly that thought was. No matter how liberal we are or are not, there are moments when each and every one of us finds value in taking a fundamentalist position on some issue or another. This is not an isolated phenomenon. There are Jewish fundamentalists, Catholic ones, Protestants, evangelicals, Muslim, conservative, liberal, democratic, Republican fundamentalists. The atheists may be among the biggest fundamentalists of all in their own unique way. But to understand this phenomenon, it seems to me we have to violate a cardinal rule of etiquette, because the phenomenon of fundamentalism that we confront today is too often a byproduct of the unholy communion of religion and politics, which at least in my house growing up were the two topics I was taught never to discuss in polite company, and have therefore obviously spent the entire rest of my adult life doing both. Given who we have gathered today as our speakers and as our audience, I trust our discussion will focus on religion more than politics. But the latter plays a critical role in understanding why fundamentalism is what it is today, and why, at least in my mind, it is the crisis of modernity, perceived or real. And from religion, we need to start with definitions. And I begin, before I try to define fundamentalism, by trying to define religion itself, just to make it a little bit more of a challenge. And I go to the definition that the anthropologists have given us. It's a marvelous definition. I learned it from a colleague many years ago. I paraphrase it, and I hope I paraphrase it close enough to accurate to be authentic. But religion is the set of beliefs, behaviors, and rituals of an individual or a community whose primary purpose is to provide the bridge between the world as we perceive it and the world as we wish it would be. Long, many clauses, and incredibly powerful as a definition of religion.
Introducing our Muslim presenter is Sarah Swick, who is a program assistant at the Minaret of Freedom Institute. She is also a student at American University, where she is studying for a doctorate in anthropology.
Thank you. It is my pleasure and honor this afternoon to introduce you to Dr. Imad ad-Deen Ahmed, whom I have the honor to work for almost a year and a half, or over a year and a half. Dr. Imad ad-Deen Ahmed is a Palestinian-American Muslim. He was actually born on a boat while his mother was fleeing Palestine. And he is a cum laude graduate of Harvard University. He obtained his doctorate from the University of Arizona in astronomy and astrophysics. Currently, he serves as the Imam of Dar Dhikr Mosque and chaplain at Perkins Hospital. He is also an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies and the University of Maryland Honors College and Georgetown University. He is president of the Minaret of Freedom Institute, a Muslim think tank which promotes liberty and free market. And he is the author of Signs in the Heavens, and editor of Islam and the Discovery of Freedom, and co-editor of Islam and the West, a Dialogue. Dr. Imad ad-Deen Ahmed.
The subject, religion, fundamentalism, and the perceived crisis of modernity, is problematical for me because I have always criticized and will continue to criticize the use of the word fundamentalism. It seems to me to be counterproductive. George Orwell, both in his 1984 and in his famous essay on politics in the English language, criticized the use of language to obscure rather than to elucidate. In 1984, he claimed that the whole purpose, the Newspeak, was the only language that had ever been invented for the purpose of making it harder to say something with any meaning. But I think that fundamentalism is the Newspeak term that has come into fashion amongst us. It's not that the word has no meaning. In a certain context in which it originated, it had a meaning, and that is with a particular movement in Christian history. A movement that originally in the 19th century, though it really began to grow in the 20th, tried to identify certain fundamentals, and thus the term fundamentalism, of Christianity that would distinguish the true Christians from everybody else. And if you did not accept those fundamentals, then you were not a true Christian. And these fundamentals were defined in such a form that the majority of Christians were excluded. all of the Roman Catholics, all of the Orthodox Catholics, and most of the mainstream Protestants. Thus, if we're going to identify, if we're going to look for similarities between those groups that we want to call fundamentalist and the origins of the term, it is perhaps on this exclusionism that we should focus. I'll get back to that, but first I want to point out that the self-identifying feature of the Christian fundamentalists is not their exclusionism, which they see as merely a consequence of their definition. For them, the defining factor among their many principles of fundamentals, the one that really is the hard core, is that the Bible is inerrant and always literal. This particular meaning of fundamentalism can be applied to other religions, groups within other religions, to varying success. But I would maintain that when applied to Islam, it's a very hard sell. Because the Quran has a verse in it, and you have to understand, those of you who don't know very much about Islam, the Quran in Islam is not the equivalent of the Bible in Christianity. The Quran for Muslims is what Christ is for Christians. It is the center of the religion. It is the heart of the religion. As Jesus Christ is believed by, peace be upon him, is believed by the Christians to be the Word made flesh. The Quran for Muslims is the Word made book. And it's supposed to be the center of the life of the Muslims, as Christ is supposed to be the center of the life of the Christians. In the Quran, which Muslims do believe is literally the Word of God, ironically, the Quran cannot be insisted that it is always literal, because the Quran says much of what we tell you is allegory. Obviously, I'm translating here, but we have a number of imams with us, and I'm sure they will back me up on this. The meaning is very clear. Much of the Quran is allegorical. Now, one can debate which verses are allegorical and what ways they're allegorical and so on and so forth, and believe me, Muslims do. But one cannot say that the Quran must always be taken literally, because if you say that, then you are denying that it is inerrant, and all Muslims believe the Quran is inerrant. If you don't remember anything else I say about Islam, remember this. The fundamental teaching of Islam, the heart and core and essence of Islam, is La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. And that means that every human being, male or female, whatever race, whatever nationality, whatever language we speak, every single human being is directly responsible to the Almighty. And no human being has the right to impose himself between the individual and the divine.
Our final presenter is from the Catholic tradition, and he will be introduced by Father Foley, who is the rector at St. Edward's Catholic Parish here in the area, and he has served St. Edward's for 4 years.
It is my honor now to introduce to you Reverend Dr. George Francis McLean, Professor of Philosophy at the Catholic University of America. He has degrees from various different institutions, and from what I am reading of your biography, great expertise in dialogue with different religious backgrounds. And so without prolonging this and going through the many different publications you have produced, I introduce Dr. McLean.
I think the theme that we have today, with many thanks to Khalil, is particularly important and particularly crucial. Religion, fundamentalism, and the perceived crisis of modernity. Because I think that modernity is in a great crisis, precisely because we are metamorphosizing at this time into a global context in which, whereas modernity had been the worldwide dominant factor in the past, it now finds itself in the face of 1.3 billion Chinese, 1 billion Indians, 1.2 billion Muslims, Africans, South Americans. Modernity has become a minority acting as a majority. So we find then that in the situation in which we have a combination of mythos and logos, we arrive at what Dr. Ahmed was just saying, and that is a point at which the logos became so total that the mythos was dismissed. If it was not scientific, it was not worthy of mankind. And so the modernity has become very much the world of logos, and it has looked down, and it has imposed upon it, and it has enslaved, and it has exploited the rest of the world. Can we admit that? Can we take account of that? Can we turn ourselves around in a process which is, I think, termed confusion? Because otherwise, we won't realize that it is perhaps now in the context, the global context in which we live, that it is modernity which is fundamentalist and will not allow for the other, whether Confucian or Hindu or Buddhist or Muslim. So we have then a crisis of modernity, and I think that was mentioned very well by Reverend Fearless. It's not a perceived crisis, it's a crisis. We have this crisis when we face minorities within our countries, whether these be guest workers from Turkey and Germany, or whether they be Hispanics in America. And we have a crisis when we face a non-secular world, when this is an engagement with China and India, with Southeast Asia, and with Islam. And so we have then a great task before us. The task, I see, is to engage the many parts of the world and to engage them in a way which truly liberates ourselves from the restrictions of science alone and enables us then to begin to see, to learn, to be enriched. Yes, to be enriched by Buddhism, as was suggested here today, and to be enriched, as I was in my studies in India, to be enriched also by my studies in Cairo. Can being apostolic mean that we do not go and argue with others to try to show their weaknesses, but rather go and to look and to listen and to find their insights and to bring them home to ourselves and transform ourselves, deepen ourselves, enrich ourselves by the insights which they have and which they can share with us? Perhaps that might be a meaning for apostolic. It might mean also that religion is for everybody. Our religion is for them, and their religion is for us. That we can enrich each other, that we can walk together, that where we find the other struggling perhaps with new modes of biblical or textual interpretation, perhaps we can help Help in order that they be able not to abandon the commitment that they have to their scriptures, but to understand more deeply and more richly the living word of the Spirit which is there and which is here and which is in them. We must go out to find the Spirit as the Spirit lives and works and thrives and promotes every human heart in this world. We must be able to share truly in a global context. We have to be able, as religious people, to go out to promote all. Did Jesus not come for the salvation of all? Did Mohammed not wish that his teaching could be shared throughout the world? Perhaps we have imposed on Jesus a sense of Jesus instead of Mohammed, and perhaps we have imposed on Mohammed a sense of Mohammed rather than Jesus. It is now time for us to break out of our fundamentalisms, to reach out to others who are struggling to be faithful in our day, to share with them, to learn from them, and together to be able to move ahead beyond modernity, which is not normative and is no longer present, into a global age in which the great religions must live together, because there is no alternative. Thank you.
Need wide open spaces too. Support World Wildlife Fund. The Dixie Chicks do. Call for your free action kit with 10 simple things you can do to help leave our children a living planet.
What are your kids saving for?
Scooter, rollerblades, and an education IRA. New computer, new telephone, and a high-yield CD account. New pants, new shoes, and a United States savings bond.
Purple sweater, purple eyeshadow, and stock in a good mutual fund.
I want 4 CDs, 3 video games, and a Roth IRA.
I want stock in a Fortune 500 company.
Help your kids save for their future. Call or visit our website and choose to save. How are you saving for your future?
I always pay more than the minimum balance on my credit card.
I just opened an education IRA for my kids.
I never invest more money than I can lose.
My husband and I participate in a 401k plan.
I've been thinking about opening a Roth IRA.
I just rolled over my 401k into an IRA.
Find out more great ways to improve your financial future. Call or visit our website and